"They will come for what is mine!" The wind's howl at 71 degrees tore through the icy air, but it was the primal roar that froze Ayana's blood. At 90 years old, the Yakut widow saw the massive silhouette of the first bear emerge from the blizzard, then the second, the third, until 67 giant shadows formed against the pale Arctic light. Her ancestral eyes, accustomed to death and resilience, had never witnessed such a horde. With her bones creaking from the cold and her soul ablaze, she gripped her old hatchet, knowing that the life of her flock and the legacy of her family were about to be decided in an impossible battle. And what she would do next would echo for generations. Ayana's grip tightened around the worn handle of the hatchet, the veins bulging on her wrinkled hands. Her eyes, which had witnessed almost a century of Yakut winters, fixed on the dark mass slowly advancing, imposing silhouettes against the lunar landscape. There was no time for paralyzing fear, only the urgency to protect. The first bear, a giant with fur matted with ice, took a hesitant step, sniffing the frigid air with curiosity and hunger. Ayana knew that hunger drove them, but also that predators, however desperate, possessed an instinct for self-preservation. She couldn't fight strength against strength. She needed to be more cunning. Her aged body, though stiff from the cold that seemed to freeze even her soul, responded to an ancestral command, a muscle memory of generations of hunters and protectors. She raised the hatchet above her head, not to attack, but to create a larger, more menacing silhouette, like a legendary figure emerging from the blizzard. A sharp, guttural cry, which seemed to come from the depths of the frozen earth and all her ancestors, tore through the air. It was not a cry of panic, but of pure fury and defiance. The sound, unexpected and as primitive as the bear's roar, made the first animal halt. Its ears twitched, assessing the small figure that dared to challenge it. The other bears, coming close behind, also slowed their pace, surprise visible in their cautious movements. Ayana seized the pause. With the hatchet still raised, she struck the blade against an exposed rock, producing a metallic, jarring sound that echoed across the silent vastness of the tundra, an alien sound that disturbed the predators. They were accustomed to the sounds of nature, the wind's howl, the crackle of ice, the rustle of snow, not to that metallic, menacing cacophony. One of the younger bears, impatient and visibly hungrier, tried to flank Ayana, moving towards the huddled flock of sheep, which bleated softly in fear. Ayana spun around, her movements slow but determined, every muscle tense. She didn't run. She didn't hide. Instead, she advanced a step, pointing the hatchet at the bear's flank. It wasn't a direct attack, but a clear threat, a silent warning. Her eyes, hardened by years of loss and overcoming, conveyed an unequivocal message. "You shall not pass, not over me." Ayana felt the ice penetrate her bones, every fiber of her body protesting against the superhuman effort. But the image of her sheep, the inheritance from her husband and her ancestors, gave her a strength that defied her age and apparent fragility. The flock was more than food. It was the living memory of her family, the link to the land and to the spirits that protected her. It was the heart of her existence. She could not fail. She continued to move, one cautious step at a time, strategically positioning herself between the bears and her sheep. She used the terrain to her advantage, positioning herself near large rocks and small elevations, creating natural barriers that hindered the horde's coordinated advance. Her gestures were simple, yet imbued with an authority that came from a lifetime of respect for nature and a deep understanding of its dangers. The icy wind whipped her face, but Ayana barely felt it. Her mind was focused, her senses sharpened by adrenaline. She observed every movement of the bears, trying to anticipate their next step, assessing the intent in their hungry eyes. With each attempt to advance, she responded with a cry, a strike of the hatchet on the rock, or a strategic movement that blocked their path, causing the predators to hesitate. The bears, though numerous, seemed confused by the unexpected resistance. They expected easy, frightened prey, not an elder who refused to yield, a woman who seemed to carry the fury of all Yakutia in her gaze. Ayana knew her energy was limited. Every movement was a monumental effort. Every cry scraped her already dry throat, but she refused to yield an inch. Cold sweat trickled down her forehead, mixing with the icy dew in the air, freezing on her eyelashes. Her lungs burned with each breath, but her determination burned even stronger, an inextinguishable flame in her chest. She was the guardian, the last line of defense between life and savage hunger. And that night, in the white, unforgiving vastness of Yakutia, old Ayana would be the unyielding wall. Ayana felt a shiver run down her spine, not just from the biting cold, but from the immense responsibility weighing on her shoulders. Her eyes swept over the horde, noticing the growing impatience in some of the younger bears, who began to growl softly, scratching the ice with their powerful claws. The leader, a massive male with ancient scars, kept his distance, observing her with a cold intelligence, as if assessing every move of the small woman. He was the greatest danger, the most experienced. She knew she couldn't afford a moment of weakness. Every breath was an act of will, every heartbeat a reminder that the life of her flock depended on her. Ayana remembered the stories told by her grandmother about how the ancient Yakuts faced nature, not with brute force, but with respect and cunning. She wasn't fighting monsters, but desperate creatures, and there was a crucial difference in that. Desperation could be exploited. With an almost inaudible growl, one of the bears attempted a swift charge, sliding over the ice towards the sheep. Ayana reacted with surprising agility for her age. Instead of confronting the bear directly, she threw a handful of snow and small stones at the animal, while simultaneously striking the hatchet against the ground with a dry, authoritative sound. The bear recoiled, confused by the unexpected tactic. It wasn't an attack, but an interruption, a challenge to its determination. Her gloved fingers were numb, but the hatchet's handle was an extension of her own will. Ayana felt a sharp pang in her right shoulder, an old injury from her youth that the intense cold and effort were reawakening. She gritted her teeth, ignoring the pain that threatened to steal her concentration. "Not now," she murmured to herself, her voice hoarse from the cold. "I cannot fail." Ayana began to hum softly, an ancient hunting song her mother had taught her. The words were about the strength of the spirit, the connection to the earth, and the protection of the weak. It wasn't for the bears, but for herself, to invoke the courage of her ancestors. The soft sound, almost a lament, contrasted with the wind's howl and the predator's growls, creating a strange, almost mystical atmosphere. The bears, for a brief moment, seemed even more intrigued, some tilting their heads, their wild instincts confused by the human melody. She realized that the horde, despite its numbers, did not act as a cohesive unit. There was a hierarchy, an internal struggle over who would be the first to reach the prey. Ayana used this to her advantage. When a bear approached too closely, she directed her attention to it, making it hesitate while the others watched, reluctant to expose themselves while a rival was confronted. It was a dangerous game of animal psychology, where the slightest hesitation could mean the difference between life and death. The bear leader, observing from afar, let out a deep roar, a command to his companions. Two younger bears advanced simultaneously, one from the right, the other from the left, trying to encircle Ayana. She knew she couldn't be in two places at once. Her heart pounded, but her mind remained clear. She didn't run. Instead, she quickly turned to the bear on the right, raising the hatchet and striking it hard against a nearby rock, creating a flash of sparks in the dark and a jarring sound that echoed in the icy air. The bear on the right recoiled with a yelp, startled by the sudden sound and light. Meanwhile, the bear on the left, which had advanced further, found Ayana spinning again, not to attack it, but to position herself directly in its path, her eyes fixed on its, transmitting an ancestral fury that seemed to burn through the most intense cold. She was not just a woman. She was the embodiment of YAKUTIA's resistance, a force of nature in herself. Ayana had marked her territory, and the bears were beginning to understand the cost of challenging her. The scent of fear, not just from the sheep, but also a faint trace of uncertainty coming from the predators, wafted through the air. She felt a pang of hope, a tenuous thread of light in the icy darkness. But she knew the night was long, and the bear's hunger relentless. Her strength did not come from muscles, but from the soul. And that soul, forged by 90 winters, would not yield. Ayana felt weakness begin to creep into her legs, like the cold that stubbornly infiltrated her thickest clothes. The thin air of the Arctic night seemed to drain the energy from her lungs with every cry, every sudden movement. But the sight of her sheep, huddled and trembling with fear, was a balm for her exhaustion. They were the extension of her family, the promise of a future, however uncertain. Her eyes, which had seen the dawn of almost 100 springs, now saw only darkness and the imminent threat of predators. The bear leader, who had previously maintained a cautious distance, began to move with more purpose. His heavy steps made the snow crunch, and his eyes, previously only curious, now gleamed with a more intense hunger, a determination Ayana recognized as dangerous. He had assessed the situation, realizing that the small woman, despite her fury, was mortally vulnerable. He knew time was running out for her. Ayana noticed the change in the leader's behavior. He was an experienced predator, and the initial hesitation was turning into strategy. She could no longer just scare them away. She needed to wound them, not physically, but in their morale, in their expectation of an easy meal. With an effort that made her muscles scream, she bent down, scooped up a handful of ice and snow, mixed with small sharp stones, and waited. When the leader took a bolder step, Ayana, with a swift and surprising movement, hurled the projectile directly at the bear's eyes. It wasn't to blind, but to irritate, to break its concentration. The bear let out a roar of surprise and anger, shaking its head, momentarily disoriented. Ayana seized the opportunity, striking the hatchet with all her remaining strength against the nearest rock, the sharp, metallic sound echoing like thunder in the night. The younger bears recoiled again, but the leader, now enraged, advanced with greater speed. Ayana knew she couldn't confront him head-on. Instead, she darted behind a large rock formation, using it as a shield. The bear collided with the rock with brutal force, making the ground tremble. Ayana, pressed behind the rock, felt the impact through the earth, and an icy fear gripped her heart. She was surrounded, and the rock wouldn't protect her for long. She took a deep breath, the icy air burning her throat. Her eyes swept the terrain, searching for a new tactic, a way out. It was then that she saw it, a narrow crevice in the ice, almost imperceptible, that led to a small grotto, a natural refuge she used to shelter the sheep during severe storms. It was risky, but it was the only chance. With a silent nod to the sheep, who seemed to understand the urgency in her eyes, Ayana began to guide them towards the crevice. The bears, confused by the maneuver, growled, trying to block the way. Ayana, hatchet in hand, spun around, not to attack, but to create a visual barrier, her arms outstretched, her frail body appearing immense in the darkness. "No!" she cried, her voice hoarse, but imbued with an authority that seemed to come from 1,000 winters. The bear leader, realizing their escape, let out a thunderous roar and tried to intercept the sheep. But Ayana threw herself in his path, not with the intention of fighting, but of delaying, of being a living obstacle. She struck the hatchet against the ice, creating a loud crack that made the bear hesitate for an instant. That instant was enough. The sheep, with a desperate bleat, squeezed through the crevice, disappearing into the darkness of the grotto. Ayana felt a momentary relief, but knew her own life was now in greater danger. She was alone, exposed, and the bears, with their prey almost in hand, were furious. The leader advanced, his enormous claws scratching the ice, his eyes fixed on her. Ayana raised the hatchet, not as an attacking weapon, but as a symbol of her refusal to yield. She was no longer just an old woman. She was the guardian of a legacy, the personification of YAKUT resilience. And, even on the verge of collapse, she would not surrender. The lead bear, with a roar that seemed to shake the frozen air itself, charged at Ayana. His eyes were pits of fury and hunger, and his claws, sharp as blades, were ready for the final attack. Ayana, with the hatchet still raised, felt the ground tremble beneath her feet. There were no more rocks to hide behind, no crevices to escape through. She was alone, her body aged and wounded, exhaustion weighing like a mountain on her shoulders. A sharp pain exploded in her left ankle, the result of an earlier misstep, and she felt her leg give way slightly. But instead of falling, Ayana steadied herself, digging the tip of the hatchet into the ice for support. Her eyes, though clouded by fatigue, maintained the flame of defiance. She knew brute force wouldn't save her. She needed something deeper, something that spoke to the wild soul of the predators, something her ancestors would have used when confronted with the impossible. She closed her eyes for an instant, searching her memory for the stories, the teachings. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. The spirit of the tundra is stronger than any claw, Ayana. Use it. When she opened her eyes, a new determination shone. She was not just a woman, she was the voice of the earth, the guardian of a legacy. With a slow and deliberate movement, Ayana lowered the hatchet, not in surrender, but in a gesture that seemed to defy the very concept of struggle. She opened her arms, exposing herself completely to the bear, and began to chant an ancient song, a melody of lament and power that spoke of the vastness of winter, the strength of life, and the inevitability of death. It was a song of respect for nature, but also of undeniable sovereignty. The bear, a few steps from her, stopped abruptly. The sound was unexpected, the posture incomprehensible. The growls of the other bears subsided, replaced by a strange, almost reverent silence. Ayana continued to sing, her voice hoarse, but imbued with a deep emotion that seemed to touch something primal in the animals. She was not asking for clemency. She was asserting her existence, her connection to that same wild world they inhabited. She was part of the tundra, as ancient and resilient as the icy mountains. As she sang, Ayana felt the intense cold infiltrate her bones, the pain in her shoulder and ankle intensify. Dizziness struck her, and she had to clench her teeth to keep from fainting. But she continued, the melody becoming a tenuous thread of hope in the darkness. She knew she was on the verge of collapse, that every note was a superhuman effort, but the song was her last weapon, a shield of spirit against the fury of the flesh. The lead bear, its eyes fixed on her, tilted its head, as if trying to decipher the meaning of that ancestral melody. Ayana saw a hesitation in its movements, a confusion in its gaze. It didn't expect this form of confrontation. She wasn't fighting like prey, but like a spirit of nature itself. The other bears, further away, began to stir, some turning their backs, perhaps bothered by the strange melody or their leader's indecision. Ayana intensified the song, her voice gaining an almost mystical strength, an echo of ancestral spirits that seemed to rise beside her. She felt an ancestral energy flow through her, a deep connection to the earth and to all who came before her. The lead bear finally let out a heavy snort, a sound of resignation. He gave one last look at the small figure who refused to be defeated, and then, with a slow and majestic movement, turned and began to walk away, disappearing into the darkness of the night. The other bears, without their leader, quickly followed suit, their silhouettes dissolving into the blizzard, leaving Ayana alone in the icy vastness. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the wind's howl. Ayana collapsed to her knees, the hatchet falling from her numb hands. Her body trembled uncontrollably, every muscle screaming in pain and exhaustion. But a faint smile, of pure victory and relief, lit up her time-worn face. She had defended her flock, her legacy, and proven that the human spirit, even in old age, could face the fury of nature. Ayana remained there, kneeling in the snow. The smile of victory faded, replaced by pure exhaustion. Her eyes closed, and for an instant she felt the icy ground pull her into a deep sleep. The wind's howl was now a distant sound, almost a lullaby. The hatchet lay beside her, a silent testament to the battle. Her numb fingers, the cold settled in her bones, ached with every heartbeat. With a hoarse groan, Ayana forced herself to open her eyes. The vapor of her breath froze in the air, a vivid reminder of the brutal temperature. The priority, always, was the flock. With monumental effort she tried to stand. Her left ankle protested with a sharp pang, and her right shoulder felt like it was on fire. She leaned on the rock, slowly dragging herself to the crevice where the sheep had taken refuge. Every movement was torture, but the image of her animals, safe, gave her strength. As she approached the grotto, she called softly, her voice almost a whisper. "My little ones, are you all right?" A soft, trembling bleat responded, and soon a woolly, frightened head peeked out. Ayana felt affection and relief. The sheep were there, huddled together, alive. She extended her gloved hand, stroking a muzzle, feeling the warmth of the fur. The connection was palpable, a bond that transcended ownership, life, continuity, the promise of a new day. Ayana knew she couldn't stay there, exposed to the cold and other dangers. She needed to tend to her wounds and ensure the sheep remained safe until dawn. With the hatchet back in her hand, she entered the grotto. The cramped, damp space offered precarious but vital shelter. The sheep moved aside a little, giving her space, but without losing eye contact. They seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, the gratitude in their dark eyes. Sitting on the icy ground, Ayana struggled to remove her gloves. Her fingers were purplish and swollen. She examined her ankle, which was already beginning to swell, and her shoulder, which ached deeply. There was no way to treat the injuries there, but she could protect them. She tore a piece from her wool shawl, wrapping it tightly around her ankle for support. For her shoulder, she tightened her coat, trying to warm the area. The pain was constant, but she accepted it, a small price for the life of her flock. As the cold penetrated deeper, Ayana leaned her head against the grotto's icy wall. Her thoughts drifted to her grandmother, to the stories of resilience and sacrifice. "Strength is not in muscles, Ayana, but in the spirit that refuses to break," she used to say. Ayana felt this truth in every fiber of her being. It wasn't just her hatchet or cunning that drove away the bears. It was the inextinguishable flame of her spirit, fueled by love for her family and her legacy. The night was still long. Ayana knew she couldn't sleep deeply, not with the cold and danger lurking. She needed to keep watch, warm the sheep with her presence, and above all maintain hope. With each breath, she felt the icy air cleanse her lungs, and new determination ignited. She had faced the fury of nature and prevailed. Dawn would come, and with it, the promise of a new beginning, a silent testament that life in Yakutia always finds a way. Ayana leaned her head against the grotto's icy wall, feeling the cold penetrate her bones, but also a strange sense of peace. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional bleat of a sheep and the distant howl of the wind, which now seemed less threatening. Her heavy eyes struggled to stay open. The promise of dawn was a beacon, but the night still stretched, dark and relentless. She watched the sheep, huddled together, seeking warmth and comfort. They were her family, her reason to continue. The pain in her ankle throbbed, a constant pulsation that mingled with exhaustion. Her shoulder burned, and each deep breath was a reminder of the superhuman effort she had made. Ayana tried to wiggle her toes, but the numbness was almost complete. The cold was winning the battle against her body, even inside the precarious shelter. She knew the danger hadn't completely disappeared. The bears might return, or other predators might be attracted by the scent of the sheep. But for now, the most immediate enemy was the environment itself. Suddenly, a dry, cracking sound echoed through the grotto. Ayana opened her eyes abruptly, her heart pounding. It wasn't the growl of a bear, nor the howl of the wind. It was a sound coming from above, from the very structure of ice and rock that sheltered them. She raised her head with difficulty, her eyes scrutinizing the faint darkness of the ceiling. A small fissure, almost invisible before, now seemed to have widened. Frozen water droplets fell, hitting the ground with a faint tinkling sound. The crack repeated, louder this time, followed by a deep creak. Ayana felt a chill run down her spine, a fear different from what she had felt with the bears. This was the fear of the earth itself, of YAKUTIA's inconstant nature. The grotto, which had seemed a safe refuge, was becoming a trap. The sheep, sensitive to any change, began to bleat softly, restless, moving nervously. Ayana tried to stand, but her ankle gave way, and she fell back onto the icy ground with a groan. The pain was excruciating, but the urgency was greater. She needed to assess the situation, understand what was happening. The ice was giving way. The grotto's structure, perhaps weakened by the lead bear's impact against the rock outside, or by the extreme temperature variation, was cracking. A fist-sized piece of ice detached from the ceiling and fell near her legs. If the grotto collapsed, they would be crushed or trapped, exposed to the deadly cold. Ayana felt despair tighten its grip on her chest. She had fought so hard to save her sheep from predators, only to lose them to their own shelter. It couldn't be. She looked at the narrow crevice that served as entrance and exit. It was the only hope. But how would she move the sheep and herself, with her injuries, through that tight and treacherous passage? While the grotto threatened to collapse, Ayana closed her eyes again, but this time not in search of rest, but of a solution. Her grandmother's voice returned once more. When the earth trembles, Ayana, listen to its secrets. It always shows a way. The earth's secrets. Ayana opened her eyes and looked at the ceiling again, searching for patterns in the cracks. In the way, the ice detached. There was a logic, a clear direction. Most of the danger seemed concentrated in a specific section. With the hatchet, which she had recovered, she lightly tapped the nearest wall. The sound was hollow, different from what she expected. There was a cavity there, perhaps an extension of the grotto or a natural tunnel. It was risky, but the alternative was to await imminent collapse. Ayana knew she had to act, and fast. She couldn't afford to hesitate. The life of her flock and her own depended on her courage and her deep ancestral wisdom once again. She raised the hatchet, feeling the familiar weight of the tool in her numb hands. The hollow sound in the wall was not a promise of ease, but of a chance, however small. With a groan of effort, Ayana dug the tip of the hatchet into the fissure she had detected. The ice cracked and small fragments fell, but the wall held. She knew she would need more than one strike. She needed precision and all the strength that still remained in her exhausted body. Her eyes fixed on the crevice, searching for the weakest point. Each strike of the hatchet sent waves of pain through her injured shoulder, but she ignored it, focusing on the task. The sheep, sensing the tension in the air and the subtle tremor of the grotto, bleated more intensely, their bodies pressing against each other. Ayana gave them a reassuring look, a silent nod that she would not abandon them. "Hold on, my little ones," she murmured, her voice hoarse. "It's not over yet." With a renewed breath, Ayana swung the hatchet, using the broader part of the blade to hammer the ice around the fissure. The sound echoed in the grotto, mixing with the louder cracks coming from the ceiling. A larger piece of ice detached, falling with a dull thud a few meters from her. Danger was imminent. She needed to be fast. Ayana remembered her grandfather, a legendary hunter who, in one of his stories, had been trapped in an avalanche and used only a knife to dig a tunnel through compacted snow, saving himself and a reindeer calf. It wasn't the same situation, but the essence of resilience was the same: to use what one had, where one was, to forge a path. With each strike, the fissure widened a little more. Her muscles burned, and dizziness threatened to fell her. But the image of her sheep, the promise of life they represented, was a fire that burned in her chest, keeping her on her feet. Finally, with a louder crack, a block of ice broke free, revealing a narrow, dark passage that extended into the rock. It was tight, barely wide enough for one sheep at a time, but it was a way. "Come on," Ayana called, her voice filled with renewed urgency. She turned to the sheep, gesturing with the hatchet towards the new opening. The sheep, initially hesitant, seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation. Ayana positioned herself at the passage entrance, using her body as a guide. With gentle nudges and encouraging bleats, she began to guide the first sheep inside. The frightened animal hesitated for a moment, but the pressure from the flock behind and Ayana's firm voice urged it forward. One by one, the sheep began to squeeze through the narrow passage, their woolly bodies brushing against the icy walls. Ayana watched them with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Each one that passed was a small victory, but time was running out. The grotto's ceiling groaned and creaked, and more pieces of ice fell, some dangerously close. Ayana felt a new pang of pain in her ankle, but adrenaline kept her from giving in. She needed to be the last, the guardian of the rear. When the last sheep disappeared into the darkness of the tunnel, Ayana let out a trembling sigh. Now it was her turn. With the hatchet still in hand, she turned and crawled into the passage, feeling the cold, damp ice against her body. The space was claustrophobic, and the darkness total. But she wasn't alone. The soft bleating of the sheep ahead was a comforting sound, a reminder that life continued, even in Yakutia's deepest abysses. Ayana moved forward, each movement a battle against pain and exhaustion, but her unwavering spirit always guided her towards the light she knew would come. Ayana moved forward, each movement a battle against pain and exhaustion, but her unwavering spirit always guided her towards the light she knew would come. The air inside the tunnel was dense and damp, laden with the smell of wet earth and ancient ice. The darkness was total, so profound it seemed to have weight, and Ayana reached out, feeling the cold, uneven walls. Her fingers brushed against sharp ice formations and rough rocks, and with each step, her injured ankle protested with a searing pang. Her shoulder ached incessantly, making it difficult even to lean on the hatchet, which she now used more as a staff than a weapon, a vital support. The sheep ahead, though frightened, followed in silence, their occasional bleats echoing strangely in the confined space, like voices from another world. Ayana could hear the rustle of their hooves on the uneven ground, a sound that, despite the fear, brought a strange and familiar comfort. They trusted her, and that trust was a burden and a blessing, a lifelink that propelled her. The passage began to slope downwards, and the ground became more slippery, covered by a thin layer of ice. Ayana felt her healthy legs slip, and for a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm her. She clung to a rocky outcrop, taking deep breaths to calm her racing heart. "Slowly, Ayana," she murmured to herself, her voice hoarse. "One step at a time, with wisdom." The descent continued, and the tunnel narrowed further, forcing Ayana to stoop, almost to crawl. Claustrophobia, a fear she rarely felt in the open vastness of the tundra, began to tighten its grip on her chest. The walls of ice and rock seemed to close in on her, and the darkness seemed to swallow her whole. She imagined the weight of the earth above, the thousands of kilograms of ice and rock ready to collapse at any moment. A wave of dizziness struck her, and she closed her eyes, fighting against the sensation of imminent fainting. No, she thought, with fierce resolve, not now, not after all this. She remembered the stories of her ancestors, who traversed dark caves and underground tunnels in search of shelter or new lands. They did not yield to fear. They found the way, guided by intuition and necessity. Ayana opened her eyes, and though the darkness persisted, a new clarity emerged in her mind. She wasn't just fleeing. She was exploring, following a path that the earth itself had revealed. She continued to crawl, dragging her injured body, using the hatchet to test the ground ahead. The cold was relentless, and the tunnel's dampness soaked her clothes, making her even more vulnerable to hypothermia. Her lips were cracked, and thirst burned her throat. But she refused to stop, driven by an inner strength. The sheep, now further ahead, bleated less frequently, perhaps sensing the difficulty of the terrain or the seriousness of the moment. Ayana could hear their movements, which reassured her that they were still there, close by. Suddenly, the passage opened slightly, revealing a small chamber. Ayana, with a groan of relief, managed to sit up, leaning her back against the cold wall. The chamber was small, but offered a brief respite from the oppressive claustrophobia of the tunnel. Above, a faint bluish light filtered through a crevice, a ray of hope that seemed like a miracle in the darkness. Was it dawn, or just a reflection of the ice? She couldn't tell, but the sight of the light, however faint, rekindled the flame of hope in her weary heart. The sheep huddled in the chamber, their warm bodies offering each other some comfort and warmth. Ayana watched the light, her eyes welling up with gratitude. The crevice was too high to reach, but the light undoubtedly indicated an exit. Perhaps, just perhaps, the tunnel wasn't a dead end after all. She needed to find a way to climb, to reach that promise of a new day. Ayana touched the ice with her fingertips, feeling the cold, slippery texture of the surface. The climb would be treacherous, but the light was an irresistible call, a promise of life. She knew the journey wasn't over yet, but hope, now, was a stronger guide than any fear. Ayana touched the ice with her fingertips, feeling the cold, slippery texture of the surface. The climb would be treacherous, but the light was an irresistible call, a promise of life. She knew the journey wasn't over yet, but hope, now, was a stronger guide than any fear. With a groan, Ayana tried to stand, but her ankle gave way, sending a sharp pain. She fell back onto the icy ground, frustration mingled with exhaustion. How could she climb with such a weakened body? The luminous crevice seemed to mock her with its inaccessibility. The sheep, sensing her distress, bleated softly, trying to comfort her. Ayana reached out, stroking their soft fur, seeking and giving a little warmth. The smooth, ice-covered walls offered no handhold. The hatchet was too short to reach the crevice. Her thoughts turned to the stories of her father, a man who built bridges of ice and snow. It's not brute force that moves mountains, Ayana, but the mind that finds the weak point, he used to say. Ayana closed her eyes, visualizing the crevice, the light. She needed something to lift herself up. Her gaze fell upon the sheep. There were many, and their bodies together formed a considerable mass. A daring, almost desperate idea began to form. It was risky, but time was running out, and the cold continued to sap her strength. She began to move the sheep with slow and careful movements, guiding them to the base of the crevice. The sheep, accustomed to her leadership, obeyed, piling up on top of each other. Ayana used the hatchet to gently tap the backs of the nearest ones, encouraging them to press together and form a living platform. It was a strange sight, but the sheep seemed to understand the urgency. With the base formed, Ayana, Hatchet in one hand, leaned on the walls and began to climb onto the pile of sheep. Every movement was painful, the fear of hurting the animals constant. She felt the warm, soft bodies beneath her feet, an unstable support. The sheep bleated in soft protest, but bore the weight of their guardian. Inch by inch, Ayana rose. The light seemed closer, stronger. She stretched her arm, trying to reach the edge. Her fingers brushed the ice without firmness. Despair returned, a knot in her throat. So close, yet so far. Her arms trembled. Her injured shoulder protested. She needed more height, one last effort. She looked at the hatchet. It was her extension, her tool. With a sigh, she raised it, using the sharp tip to create a small foothold in the ice just below the crevice. The ice cracked, a piece broke off, but the hatchet's tip held. With this precarious anchor, Ayana made one last effort. She pushed herself upwards, feeling her body scream. Her fingers, almost frozen, gripped the edge of the crevice. The ice was sharp, but she didn't care. With a final pull, she hoisted herself up enough to peek out. The sight was breathtaking. The sky, tinged with purple and orange, announced the sunrise. The tundra stretched out a white, shimmering mantle. The air, icy, felt cleaner, promising. Ayana breathed deeply, the pure air filling her lungs. Freedom was there, but she wasn't alone. The sheep were still in the chamber, trapped. The crevice was too narrow for them. The challenge wasn't over, but hope was a living flame. She had found the light. Now she needed to find the way for everyone. She looked at the hatchet, still stuck in the ice. It was the key. With renewed breath, Ayana began to work, using the blade to widen the crevice, one strike at a time, with the unwavering determination of a woman who refused to be defeated. The rising sun painted the horizon, promising a new day. Ayana, hatchet in hand, focused all her remaining energy on the task. Every strike on the ice was a symphony of pain and determination. The arm holding the tool trembled, and her injured shoulder protested with sharp pangs. But the image of the sheep huddled in the chamber, waiting for her, was a more powerful engine than any pain. The ice was stubborn, but not invincible. With the sharp tip of the blade, she scraped, hammered, and broke off small pieces, widening the crevice millimeter by millimeter. The sound of the ice yielding, mixed with the creaking of the grotto still groaning below, was the soundtrack of her struggle. The sun, outside, continued its majestic ascent. Golden and pink rays began to penetrate through the crevice, painting the interior of the chamber with soft, hopeful colors. Ayana felt the faint warmth on her face, a promise of life that propelled her. The sheep, noticing the change in light, bleated with more vigor, their eyes fixed on the opening, as if they knew salvation was near. Ayana gave them a tired smile, but full of love. "Almost there, my little ones," she murmured, her voice hoarse. "Almost there." With each strike, Ayana remembered her grandfather's lessons on patience and persistence. "The hardest stone yields to water that drips ceaselessly," he used to say. And she was the water, shaping the ice with her unbreakable will. Her fingers were numb, but the hatchet seemed an extension of her very being, an ancestral tool that connected her to generations of Yakuts who had shaped the environment to survive. Finally, with a louder crack than before, a considerable block of ice broke free, falling out of the crevice with a muffled thud onto the snow. The opening now was large enough. It wasn't a spacious passage, but a sheep could pass with a little effort. Ayana felt a wave of relief so intense that her legs threatened to give way. She clung to the edge of the crevice, breathing deeply, feeling the pure, icy air fill her lungs. "Come," she called, her voice filled with new urgency. She turned and, with difficulty, descended from the sheep platform, falling gently among them. Her ankle protested, but she ignored it. She needed to guide the flock. With the hatchet, she indicated the passage, gently nudging the first sheep. The animal, hesitant, sniffed the opening, and with a bleat of apprehension squeezed out, disappearing into the dawn light. One by one the sheep followed, their woolly bodies brushing against the icy walls, their bleats of fear transforming into bleats of relief as they emerged onto the tundra. Ayana counted them, her heart filling with gratitude for each animal she saw escape. 50, 60, 67. All were safe. Now it was her turn. With one last look at the chamber that had served as their shelter and almost their tomb, Ayana crawled to the opening. The passage, though widened, was still a challenge for her injured body. She pushed herself through, feeling the ice scrape against her clothes and skin. The final effort was almost unbearable, but the thought of her sheep, safe outside, gave her the necessary strength. With a final pull, Ayana emerged into the vast white immensity of YAKUTIA. The sun was high on the horizon, bathing the landscape in a golden, blinding glow. The icy air whipped her face, but it was a welcome cold, a reminder that she was alive. The sheep were scattered across the snow, some grazing on the small exposed shrubs, others simply enjoying their freedom. Ayana fell to her knees in the soft snow, the hatchet falling from her hands, her eyes filled with tears, not of pain but of deep emotion. She had succeeded. She had faced the bears, the cold, the grotto's collapse, and she had prevailed. The tundra, once a relentless enemy, now seemed to embrace her, a silent testament to her resilience. The path ahead would be long and difficult, but Ayana knew that with her indomitable spirit and the wisdom of her ancestors, she would find a way. Life, in Yakutia, always finds a way. The path ahead would be long and difficult, but Ayana knew that with her indomitable spirit and the wisdom of her ancestors, she would find a way. Life in Yakutia always finds a way. Ayana remained on her knees in the snow, her body trembling, not just from the cold, but from the exhaustion that now completely overwhelmed her. The hatchet, her faithful battle companion, lay beside her, its blade dulled and stained, a silent testament to her struggle. The sun, which had once seemed a miracle, now revealed the relentless vastness of the tundra, an infinite white sea stretching as far as the eye could see. The icy wind whipped her face, and each breath was a painful effort, burning her lungs. Her eyes, brimming with tears of relief and gratitude, swept over the flock. The 67 sheep were there, scattered, some already seeking the rare shrubs that dared to defy the ice, others simply standing, absorbing the light of the new day. They were life, continuity, the reason for her struggle, but the joy of immediate victory soon gave way to harsh reality. Her ankle throbbed with a searing pain, and her shoulder felt raw. Every muscle in her 90-year-old body screamed in protest. How would she, a woman so wounded and exhausted, guide the entire flock back home across miles of snow and ice? A whisper of despair threatened to settle in her heart. She had overcome the bears, the deadly cold, the grotto's collapse, but the journey back seemed as great a challenge as those she had just faced. Ayana closed her eyes, the image of her village, so distant and welcoming, dancing in her mind. She could almost feel the warmth of the fire, the scent of herbal tea, the embraces of her neighbors. But between her and that comfort, there was an icy immensity. "No," she murmured, her voice hoarse but firm. "I cannot give in now." Her grandmother's voice, strong and clear, echoed in her memory. "Ayana, true strength is not in never falling, but in rising every time life knocks you down." She opened her eyes, and a new determination ignited in her gaze. Her ancestors had faced even more brutal winters, even greater losses, and had always found a way. She would be no different. With a groan of effort, Ayana reached out and grasped the hatchet. The familiar weight of the tool in her numb hands was a reminder of her capacity to overcome. She dug the tip of the hatchet into the snow and, using it for support, began to rise. It was a slow and agonizing process. Every movement sent waves of pain through her body, but she refused to yield. Her lips were cracked and dry, but a faint smile of pure stubbornness appeared on her wrinkled face. Finally, she was on her feet, swaying but upright. Ayana looked at her sheep, then at the horizon. The sun, now higher, painted the sky with shades of gold and white. She knew she needed to find a landmark, a sign of life. Her eyes scanned the landscape, searching for anything that could indicate the way, and then she saw it. Far away, on the line where sky and snow met, a faint column of smoke rose, almost invisible against the white. It was weak, almost a mirage, but it was there. Smoke. Smoke meant fire, and fire meant people. It meant her village. An overwhelming wave of emotion hit her, and a warm tear streamed down her icy face. It wasn't the end of the journey, but it was the beginning of the return. With a determined nod to her sheep, Ayana picked up the hatchet and, limping, took the first step towards that smoke, a beacon of hope in the icy vastness. Ayana took the first step, and her injured ankle protested with such a sharp pang that she almost fell again. The hatchet, now an improvised staff, sank into the soft snow, offering precarious support. Each step was a small victory, a battle fought against the pain and exhaustion that permeated every fiber of her being. The sun slowly climbed in the sky, but the warmth emanating from it was illusory. The wind continued to blow mercilessly, cutting exposed skin and freezing the tears that stubbornly streamed down. She felt her throat dry, hunger gnawing at her stomach, but the sight of the smoke, now a little more defined, was her only food and her only drink. The sheep, as if sensing their guardian's urgency, began to follow her. It wasn't an orderly march, but a slow and hesitant procession through the deep snow. Ayana watched them from time to time, a faint smile appearing on her cracked lips as she saw their woolly bodies moving in unison, a patch of life against the infinite whiteness. They were her family. Her legacy and the responsibility for them gave her a strength her body no longer possessed. Hours dragged on, or perhaps it was just minutes, she no longer knew. Time on the tundra was an elastic concept, shaped by pain and hope. The smoke grew, becoming a more robust column, and Ayana could almost smell burning wood, the familiar aroma of her home. But with each step, the effort became almost unbearable. Her eyes began to blur, and her head spun. She knew she was reaching her limit. Suddenly, a sound. Not the wind, not the bleating of sheep, but a distant bark. Ayana stopped, raising her head with difficulty. Her eyes, despite blurred vision, tried to scan the horizon. And then she saw it, small dark specks moving in the snow, approaching rapidly. Dogs, village dogs, and behind them, human figures. A wave of emotion so intense hit her that her legs finally gave way. She fell to her knees again, the hatchet slipping from her hands. Tears, now of pure relief, streamed freely down her face. They came. They found her. The figures approached, and Ayana could distinguish the worried faces of her neighbors. The first to reach her was Mikhail, the young hunter she had taught to track. His eyes widened at the sight of the elder's condition, her face pale and marked, her clothes torn, the hatchet beside her. He quickly knelt with an expression of shock and reverence. "Ayana," he exclaimed, his voice choked, "by the spirit of winter, you are alive!" Other villagers arrived, their faces reflecting a mixture of relief and astonishment. They surrounded her, offering blankets, hot tea from a thermos, words of comfort. The sheep, recognizing the familiar faces, began to bleat with more joy, as if they too were celebrating the reunion. Ayana couldn't speak. She just nodded, a faint, exhausted smile on her face. She extended a trembling hand to Mikhail, who held it tenderly. The human connection, so vital and so strong, enveloped her like a warm embrace. She was home. She was safe. The journey was over. Ayana, the guardian of the flock, the woman who defied the fury of YAKUTIA, was finally back. Mikhail and the other villagers lifted her with the delicacy of one handling a fragile treasure. They wrapped her in warm furs, the scent of mink and fox mingling with the aroma of smoke and snow. The hot tea, offered by one of the older women, burned her throat but brought a comforting warmth that spread through her icy veins. Ayana felt Mikhail's skilled hands examining her swollen ankle and aching shoulder. She saw the admiration in his eyes, a silent reverence that spoke louder than any words of praise. The sheep, now calmer, were guided by the dogs and other villagers towards the settlement, their bleats now a chorus of contentment and relief. The journey back was slow, but filled with a human warmth that Ayana would never forget. She was carried on an improvised sled, covered by more furs, while the villagers took turns pulling her through the snow. The sun, now high in the sky, illuminated the path, and the village smoke had become a robust column, a visible beacon of hope. As they approached, children ran to meet them, their shouts of joy echoing in the icy vastness. The faces of the elders, previously marked by worry, now lit up with smiles and tears of emotion. In the village, Ayana was taken directly to her yurt, where the fire crackled and the air was imbued with the scent of healing herbs and warmth. The village women carefully undressed her, washed her wounds, and applied ancestral ointments to ease the pain. Her body was exhausted, but her spirit was at peace. She watched the faces around her, each one a part of her extended family, her beloved community. They had found her. They had brought her back home. In the days that followed, as she slowly recovered, Ayana became the center of attention. Children visited her, listening with wide eyes to the stories of her battle against the bears, her escape through the dark grotto, her unwavering resilience. Adults came seeking her wisdom, not just about survival in the tundra, but about the strength of the human spirit. She became a living symbol, the embodiment of the legend her ancestors had forged. Her home, once a quiet refuge, was now a sanctuary of valuable stories and teachings. Ayana, sitting by the fire, her ankle bandaged and shoulder still aching, felt a deep gratitude. She had lost much, but had gained something even greater, the confirmation that the connection to her ancestors and her community was the true source of her inner strength. The sheep, her precious flock, were safe. Grazing on the outskirts of the village, their bleats a constant reminder of the life she had defended with such ferocity and courage. Winter was still long, but the village was more united than ever. Ayana's story spread, not just as a tale of bravery, but as a testament to the human capacity to overcome the impossible. She had proven that age was just a number, that physical fragility could be overcome by an unbreakable will. Ayana, the matriarch, the guardian, the living legend of YAKUTIA, looked to the future with serenity. She knew new challenges would come, but she also knew that the spirit of her people, forged in ice and snow, was indomitable. And as long as there was life, there would be hope, and always a way. Her legacy would not just be the saved flock, but the flame of resilience ignited in the hearts of all. Ayana, with a gentle smile, closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the fire and the love of her village. She was home, and her story would live forever, an inspiring echo across the vast icy plains of YAKUTIA. Ayana slept deeply, a restorative sleep long denied her by constant vigilance and incessant struggle. The warmth of the yurt fire and the aroma of medicinal herbs soothed her body and soul, weaving a mantle of peace over her exhaustion. Upon waking days later, she felt a lightness that was not just physical but also spiritual, as if the weight of the world had been, for a moment, suspended. Her ankle still ached, her shoulder throbbed with a persistent memory, but the pain was now a distant reminder of a battle won. not an imminent threat. She sat up, propped on piles of soft furs, and watched the village life through the yurt's opening. The sun, though still weak, bathed the landscape in a silvery glow that promised a less cruel day. The sheep, her precious flock, grazed peacefully on the outskirts, their soft bleats echoing in the icy air, a sound that for Ayana was the sweetest of melodies. The murmur of adult conversations and the sound of children's laughter filled the air, a vibrant hymn to the life she had defended tooth and nail. Mikhail was the first to enter, bringing a bowl of warm broth and a smile that lit up his young face, marked by a new maturity. "Good morning, Ayana Appa," he said, using the term of respect for grandmother, and his eyes shone with a mixture of relief and admiration. "How do you feel today, our guardian?" Ayana smiled, a genuine smile that reached her wrinkled eyes, revealing the wisdom accumulated over 9 decades. "Better, my son. Winter still tries to embrace me with its icy winds, but my spirit refuses to freeze. The flame in my chest burns stronger now." Mikhail sat at her feet, his eyes fixed on her with an almost reverent admiration. "Your story, Ayana Appa, is on everyone's lips, whispered around the fires, taught to the children. They retell it with the same passion they tell the legends of our ancestors. You have become one of them, a living hero." Ayana felt a soft blush on her wrinkled cheeks. The idea of being a legend was strange, almost overwhelming for her humility. She had never sought glory, only the survival of her flock and the continuity of her people, the essence of her existence. "I just did what was necessary, Mikhail, what any of us would do for what we love and protect." "No, Ayana Appa," he insisted, shaking his head vehemently. "No one else would have faced 67 hungry bears with a hatchet, or escaped a collapsing grotto, wounded and exhausted. Your courage is a beacon for all of us, a constant reminder that the strength of our people lies not just in our arms, but in our indomitable heart and our connection to the land." Mikhail's words struck a deep chord in Ayana, resonating with the truth she felt in her own being. She realized that her struggle was no longer just hers. It had become a symbol, an inexhaustible source of inspiration for the entire village. Winter was still long and harsh, and challenges would not cease in the icy vastness of Yakutia. But the story of her resilience had infused new hope, a renewed belief in the capacity for overcoming that pulsed in every Yakut heart. In the following days, Ayana's yurt became a point of pilgrimage. Women brought her delicate embroideries and ancient songs. Men shared hunting and fishing stories, seeking her blessing and wisdom. Children sat in silence with wide eyes, absorbing every word, every gesture, as if drinking from an ancestral spring of knowledge and courage. Ayana, though still recovering, found renewed strength in her connection with her people. She spoke of the importance of listening to nature, of respecting animals, of never giving up, no matter how dark and cold the night might seem. She taught that true wealth was not in possessions, but in the bonds that united people, in the memory of ancestors, and in the hope of the future they built together. She remembered the loneliness she had felt in the grotto, the feeling that she was alone against the relentless world. But now, surrounded by the love and admiration of her village, she knew she had never truly been alone. The spirit of her ancestors guided her, and the love for her people propelled her with each new dawn. Ayana looked at Mikhail, who was now helping an older woman repair a tent outside, his movements agile and purposeful. He was the future of the village, and she, the past that guided him, the bridge between generations. Her story, she realized, was not an end, but a new beginning, a legacy of resilience that would continue to shine, like the sun of Yakutia, even in the harshest winters, warming the hearts of all. Ayana felt a deep peace, a sense of renewed purpose. She was not just a guardian of sheep, but a guardian of spirits, a living flame of hope for her people.